Just a moment. Okay, so the recording has started. I would like to welcome everyone at our today's little session. As I mentioned, we are using this opportunity of a Good Friday being a public holiday for the University of Nottingham and getting together instead for an online session, which the two of our colleagues from Pakistan so kindly agreed to talk today and join this online session, despite it being the month of Ramadan, many people fasting and dedicating their thoughts to other matters. I would like to, first of all, thank you for this effort and perseverance and contribution to the discussion. So this lecture, this talk rather, is taking place within the module within the course that I convened, which is called Contemporary Security Challenges, where we talk about traditional hard security matters, and we are nearing the end of the semester, so we've been through many different traditional security challenges, but at the same time, we also try to shift our focus and address issues that come more from the background of soft security challenges and the emergent security challenges that the focus of the international community has also been shifting towards those and prioritizing them. Didn't quite prove to be the case since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but nevertheless, we are trying to keep focus on what's important. I will give a short introduction to our today's discussion from the synopsis that I furnished our participants with. And indeed, we already had the pleasure of discussing the Pakistan floods of 2022. In 2022 itself, we had the director of the Asia Pacific IFRC here with us in Malaysia, who was able to tell us some things about how the disaster unfolded, and some of the questions that I posed to this discussion. For example, how prepared Pakistan was, how prepared the government was to react to the disaster, what programs were in place for disaster relief, disaster preparedness, and disaster prevention. What conditions prompted a slow, rather, or justify a slow response. And also he covered for us, coming from one of the meetings, I think in Geneva, if I'm not mistaken, coming to us with a somber news that not so much of international aid was collected for multiple causes that do not concern matters of hard security, like Russia-Ukraine conflict. And to those who were underattended to, he would include Pakistan floods of 2022, other matters, like, for example, Bangladesh struggling to provide for Myanmar, for Rohingya refugees on this territory, because also they were able to last year, I think, to collect only 60% of the aid that they need. So that goes across the board. It doesn't concern only Pakistan floods, but overall under attendance to the matters that concern the issue of soft security, while especially Europe is focused on something else. We all know where. At the same time, I think the developing countries for the past year became more successful and more persuasive in shifting this focus of attention to something that matters to them. And I hope it will be a remedy to nurture the projects that the developing countries, the countries of the so-called global south, have in mind in terms of supporting their populations, and in the case of Pakistan, aid in reconstruction effort, and thinking far ahead for the cases of disaster relief and the lessons learned, how to deploy them in the future. So I think I've spoken long enough. I could go on and on, but we are not here to listen to me. So if you don't mind, I would like to introduce our guests together again, who kindly agreed to speak. And from the bottom of my heart, before we also pass to the presentations, I would like to thank Ms. Shaista Riaz, who is here with us today, who is a research associate at the Aga Khan University, Pakistan, and she's one of the University of Nottingham IR alumni. I think the most of the credit goes to her today for organizing this meeting and bringing these amazing speakers to be with us. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Mr. Mustafa Hassan, who is, and I will introduce the second speaker right before the presentation. Mr. Mustafa Hassan is a healthcare executive, currently serving as a director of research at Aga Khan University in Pakistan, which the university operates the largest healthcare research organization in Pakistan, which employs thousands of people across hundreds of cities all over the country, and spans domains ranging from addressing issues in child and maternal health, stop the spread of infectious diseases, building capacity for healthcare staff, and strengthening the healthcare infrastructure in the country, just acutely important right now. AKU's primary funders include the world's leading development agencies, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, World Health Organization, National Institutes of Health, and Wellcome Trust, among others. I would also like to add that Mr. Mustafa played a key leadership role in Pakistan's response to devastating floods in 2022. He was a part of the team that helped the university leverage its research infrastructure to establish over 1,200 medical camps that treated over 400,000 flood victims within a 2-month period. And he's currently working with a broad set of stakeholders to help develop and integrate disaster response program that builds resilience with the existing healthcare ecosystem in Pakistan and positions it to respond more effectively to any future crisis. And last but not least, Mr. Mustafa Hassan, prior to joining AKU, was Executive Director of Product Development and Commercialization at CVS Health, one of the largest healthcare companies in the United States, with a focus on developing, launching, and commercializing clinical programs aimed at supporting complex patient populations. During his 17 years in the United States, Mustafa worked across the healthcare ecosystem and technology management, consulting, and innovation. And he holds a degree in industrial engineering from Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and received his MBA from the University of Chicago. That's quite a biography, but I couldn't miss any part of it because I think it represents you very well, Mr. Mustafa. Now the floor is yours. You can start. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the extended introduction. I think you took 5 minutes of my prepared comments, which is great. And thank you for having us. You mentioned, Ramadan a couple of times in your prelude to this. And I think one of the things that this month offers us is an opportunity to reflect. And for me, I'm grateful to be here because it allows me to reflect on the tragedy that unfolded in Pakistan, one of the most populous countries in the world. And the havoc that it wreaked on, lives and livelihoods, and being pretty intimately involved in the response effort. It's this conflicting feeling of, wanting to do something, but no matter how much you do, you just feel like you're not doing enough. but I'm grateful to have this forum to talk about some of the work that's going on. I'll take about 20 minutes or so to provide some brief overall comments on Pakistan's flood response. But I want to spend most of the time, talking more specifically about the medical response, because that's something that I was personally involved in, and I think for the folks on the line, you can get a pretty good understanding of Pakistan's overall response with all of the online literature that's available. But I'm hoping to offer maybe a little bit more of a nuanced perspective on how things unfolded from a medical perspective, and then highlight some longer term opportunities that we're involved with right now that we hope will go make a difference in the event of any future climate driven catastrophes such as floods or earthquakes, etc. So overall, I'll flip through some slides in a little bit, but just some contextual comments. Pakistan's response to the floods of last year, the floods were unprecedented, but I think the country's response was, unprecedented as well. The floods caused profound impact on the country, widespread devastation, and the way the government mobilized resources, to organize this response was, of critical importance. Pakistan isn't a stranger to natural disasters. The 2022 floods were catastrophic, but in 2010 we had similarly catastrophic floods as well, where over 20 million people were impacted, and we had almost $43 billion in damages. The government this time around responded. The government and the military responded very quickly to the floods when they hit. In fact, the military in particular, played a crucial role in the search and rescue operations, as well as providing emergency relief to those affected. The government, on their part, declared a state of emergency, which enabled it to mobilize additional resources and coordinate across various public and private sector agencies. In addition to this, the government established this flood relief fund, to raise funds from both local and international donors to finance its activities. And the main focus, was to provide food, shelter, and medical aid through a lot of the relief camps that the government had set up. In terms of, the longer term response, there's a broad-based recognition that Pakistan needs a robust long-term solution to be able to deal with floods and other climate-driven catastrophes. One of the initiatives that was taken after the 2010 floods was the establishment of what we call the National Disaster Management Authority, the NDMA. So the NDMA is a partnership between the military and the government around all things related to disaster risk reduction, preparedness, and response. And then, the government has also invested quite a bit in infrastructure to, better prepare for floods in the future. Dams, reservoirs, drainage systems, irrigation systems, early warning systems, as well as better engagement and training of the community. So, while at a macro level, things in Pakistan remain quite challenging economically, politically, and from a security standpoint, what gets, I think, overlooked is, a fair bit of effort that has been put in place to build capabilities and to build systems and to get people organized around responding. In fact, one of the things that we saw, right, like as horrific as these floods were, we actually didn't see a severe outbreak of disease. Cholera and GI issues, etc. We did, but not to the magnitude that we feared. When COVID hit, for example, 3 years ago, we don't have very much, in terms of resources and infrastructure, but Pakistan's response was actually fairly effective given its constraints. And, we didn't see the kind of mass casualty play out over here that we did in certain neighboring countries or other places in the world. And I think some of these things actually are a testament to the fact that the underlying work that's happening is producing some results, although there is a long way to go, in moving forward. So with that said, for me, it's a privilege to be here at Aga Khan University because AKU is, an institution of national importance and plays a critical role, not just with, the COVID pandemic and the floods, but overall, whenever there's an outbreak of disease, and AKU plays a really important role societally in building more resilience and more capacity for Pakistan to respond. So, I'll share a couple of slides, to walk through the medical aspects, and then, I do want to leave maybe 10 minutes or so at the end, to open it up for discussion. So, let me figure out how to share my screen. Can you guys see this presentation?
Yes, we can see.
So I'll skip my bio because you did a wonderful job covering it. So just a quick snapshot. The floods were devastating. About 116 districts in Pakistan were impacted. Just to give you a magnitude, all of Pakistan has 170 districts, right? So about 2/3 of Pakistan was impacted by this. Almost 33 million people, so about a sixth or seventh of the total population. Almost 8 million people displaced. This is what I was saying, right? Like 1,800 deaths, bad, but not as bad as it would have been had we not had a basic infrastructure to respond. Significant amount of injuries. Our work at AKU is particularly focused on issues of women and child health. So that's a lot of the work that we do. 1.6 million women, of reproductive age. So imagine, you're in your second or third trimester, and your house gets washed away, and you're left out in the open. It is an incredibly hard situation to find yourself in. A lot of livestock died, right? This is the livelihood for a lot of folks. And like I said, right, like the amount of houses damaged, the schools damaged, healthcare facilities affected, roads, bridges. It was swaths of land inundated and underwater. To give you a snapshot of the damage assessment, right, wide-scale destruction of houses all over Pakistan, mainly concentrated in Sindh, because Sindh is the province where a lot of the water from the rivers that flow from upstream to downstream accumulates. So Sindh, particularly bore the brunt of this devastation, even though it was spread out in other provinces as well. I think this picture sort of. And by the way, there's some background noise. If you guys aren't speaking, would be nice if folks can put themselves on mute. Thanks. So this picture actually tells you the tale of what was happening on the ground.
Sorry, Mustafa, you're also muted. Yeah. Sorry.
All right. I think I unmuted myself. Yeah, it's a whole. This particular picture captures, my attention. It's a whole family of people who are completely displaced, and all they're left with is the few belongings. Kids barely clothed. Water everywhere, and essentially not much help in sight. And you can see sort of this little brick structure, the level to which the waters, had risen. So these people had found shelter on any, amount of high ground that they could. So how did AKU respond? And, what role did we play? So rapidly, right, we had to figure out what is our strategy. And, we sort of coordinated with the National Emergency Operations Center that called an urgent meeting to deliberate upon, how we should respond and, what the approach should be. So, a few of us, met with the NEOC representatives, and there were, folks representing other public and private institutions as well, where we took an overall assessment of the situation, and quickly came to the decision that we had to establish medical camps, both mobile as well as static camps, in these affected districts, in close sort of collaboration with, our partners, the Gates Foundation, the World Health Organization, as well as, many of the other sort of development agencies that we work with. How we went about operationalizing that strategy, one was continued close consultation with, the national, provincial, and district level emergency operating committees. the NDMA that I mentioned, had, was providing pretty good visibility into, risks and which districts were at higher risk versus lower risk. So we prioritized those that were higher risk. And then for each of those districts that were prioritized, we developed sort of specific plans, to set up these health camps rapidly and quickly, engaged folks from, supply chain and procurement and transportation, security, et cetera, to make sure we had continuous supply of medicines, personnel, and equipment, et cetera. In addition to that, it was really important for us to have a good mechanism in place because we knew we would be, delivering a lot of interventions. So having a mechanism in place to collect data and to be able to report on that data in a relatively real-time fashion, was pretty important. So we leveraged a lot of our research infrastructure to be able to do that. Like I said, right, like these were the areas in Pakistan where most of the medical camps were set up. You can see most of them, are in the Sindh area with some in Punjab as well as, up north as well. Overall, 1,200 medical camps were established. And, all of these camps were fairly standard by design so that, we could scale them up pretty rapidly. All of them had, a standard set of resources, one in charge, a couple of medical officers, one, paramedic or dispenser, one person who would vaccinate kids, because we actually took this as an opportunity since we were going to be seeing so many patients to be able to assess vaccination status and provide vaccinations where necessary. I'll share some data on that shortly. One person to help with all of the camp logistics, and we had volunteers that we were assigning to these camps. In terms of how the camps were set up, right? Very basic, you have the entrance, a small desk, that's a screen, and then divided up into male and female areas. We had male physicians, female physicians, as well as, once they got diagnosed or treated, we had the vaccinator and the pharmacy set up before people. So it was a pretty, it was almost like a production line, every single one of these 1,200 medical camps. And then the dashboard on the right, basically, we met as a leadership team every day, 7 days a week, to look at, overall stats, how was the data trending, where were we seeing more volume, how was the disease burden dispersed across these camps, et cetera. And that allowed us to make pretty rapid and effective decisions on, how to tweak our support to provide maximum coverage and maximum impact. In terms of the kind of services, that were being provided, three categories. One was, just general screening. So blood pressure, temperature, weight, oxygen, et cetera. We were checking, hemoglobin, and we were, providing consultations for common illnesses, skin diseases, GI issues, et cetera, and providing, medications to treat these diseases. Second, targeted towards, maternal and child health. We saw the number of how many pregnant women there were who were affected. Essential care materials, were being provided to these individuals. And we were using these interactions, these touch points with all of these patients in the community to provide, education and learning around, sanitation practices and, how to sort of prevent, the spread of diseases, et cetera. In the bottom, you see some pictures of, some of these camps. Very basic in setup, but very effective in how, they were able to sort of deliver results. I'll talk a little bit about, the coverage itself. So again, 1,200 camps across 34 districts, almost 400,000 people, treated, about 106,000 women of reproductive age, almost 10,000 pregnant women, about 13,000 vaccinations given to women of reproductive age, 87,000 kids that we served. We provide 35,000 vaccinations. These are kids who normally otherwise would not have gotten even your basic vaccinations done. And again, you can see some of the stats across the health camps that we had set up all over the country. You can see that most of the concentration is in the Sindh province, which was the hardest hit. Some numbers, around, how these health camps sort of trended across the many districts. I don't want to bore everybody with too much data. Our coverage of outpatient visits, And again, just speaks to the granularity of the data that was coming in, for us. Women of reproductive age and pregnant women that were being treated across each of these, districts through our medical camps, vaccination status across the districts, how we were supporting children under 5 years of age, again, across each of these districts, routine immunizations being provided, OPV drops. So again, all in all, it was, sort of a Herculean effort, and it wasn't just possible with us acting alone. We were acting in partnership, again, with the government agencies, the military, etc., through the infrastructure, that had already been developed. And again, some pictures of, some of our supplies and us working with local populations. So moving on, right? One of the things that the floods did was that it exposed, as we did these medical camps, it really exposed additional needs that require longer term commitment to support these national efforts on part of AKU. Like I said, Pakistan has been consistently ranked among the top 10 most vulnerable countries from a climate perspective. We know that it's only a matter of time before we get the next emergency or the next crisis or the next hazard. And we are pretty vulnerable to these recurring cycles of heat waves, droughts, earthquakes, and storms. That all of that is exacerbated by the vulnerability in our existing population. We have a significant disease burden. We have insufficient staff, trained medical staff. And the overall state of the infrastructure is really lacking, and that really exacerbates our problem. So, in terms of where we're focused on, to build more resilience across the healthcare infrastructure, it's really these 4 broad categories. One is knowledge transfer. So building capacity within healthcare and non-healthcare workers on disaster management best practices. So what do you do in the first 24 hours of a disaster, for example? Second is, we're providing technical assistance to government as well as developing agencies, because AKU operates probably one of the most sophisticated healthcare delivery systems. So in Pakistan, so we're taking a lot of the knowledge that sits within the AKU infrastructure and the AKU organization and transmitting that more broadly to institutions across Pakistan. Second is, we have a real focus on strengthening the emergency and trauma response infrastructure. We're looking at upgrading emergency rooms in, district hospitals based on international standards. We're strengthening, the referral networks within districts so that, when emergencies happen, where to take somebody for what type of, an emergency. And we're working with transportation networks to ensure that the right transportation is provided, when this happens. We also have a significant continued focus on understanding and treating and disseminating sort of the treatment of common clinical conditions. Number 1 on the list is actually mental health. And it's, I think we're all aware that mental health often goes undetected and untreated, but, it plays an absolutely catastrophic sort of impact on people's well-being. So, we have a keen focus, a dedicated team of researchers looking at issues of mental health and developing and disseminating sort of interventions in that space, as well as, common skin diseases, malnutrition, GI issues, etc. And then lastly, we have a focus on strengthening sort of the institutional response capacity, in Pakistan, finding opportunities to strengthen public-private partnerships, strengthening sort of an overall integrated disaster response model so that it's not just that when the next disaster hits that AKU knows what to do, but AKU plus the government of Sindh plus the private agencies that are delivering food to people, they're all sort of acting in unison. And then last is we have a fairly sophisticated data reporting, management, and analytics capability. And we're looking to actually leverage that capability to provide real-time data at a district and provincial and national level to help senior leadership understand where what are the resource mobilization patterns, and how are those superimposed on areas that have the highest risk. One of the things that we saw happen in the early days of the flood response was too many resources, and sometimes duplicative resources, rushing to the same areas, while other areas were getting neglected, and it's because it was sort of a coordination issue, because we didn't know who needed what at what point in time. So we're looking to leverage our analytic capability to develop these tools that can be put on more of a national level to help send the right amount of resource to the right place at the right time. So that's sort of in a nutshell our overall response. Again, some pictures of us conducting site visits, really in the field, talking to people, gathering their requirements, really understanding how do we tailor solutions that meet their needs in their context versus imposing something that has been developed somewhere far away that may or may not work in our unique context. So spending a lot of time doing this. So that's sort of our medical response in a nutshell in the context of the larger calamity that unfolded. Again, thanks for listening, and we're really looking forward to the impact this will have in the future. So I'll open it up for any comments or any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mustafa. I think it was a comprehensive presentation, and a particular thank you for the data that you presented. I think some of us might want to talk about particular part of that data and maybe ask some clarifying questions. But I propose that we first give an opportunity to both speakers to lay out their thoughts. In other words, I'm going to welcome our second speaker, Mr. Nasir, shortly. And then we will pass to the Q&A session, and I think we will be able to finish just in time. I realized that I got carried away when giving the introduction, and I guess I forgot to mention why for us in Malaysia, this topic is also of particular interest besides the obvious of us being neighbors. A bit of distant neighbors, but nevertheless, I think in Malaysia, the issue of Pakistan floods was quite high on the agenda and interest for the people. And for months, I remember we've been collecting resources for humanitarian aid, not only that rendered on the part of the government, but also from whatever people could donate, either in terms of money or the necessary items, and there are organizations who were acting promptly in order to deliver that aid. Though I guess that was still not enough, and I had a question about it, but I will ask it later. And also, I wanted you to have just an idea of what is the representation of geography of your today's audience, because especially some of us here, I think, have an experience of dealing and coping with natural disasters and climate change. Either it is something in the past or something looming and something that needs to be dealt with. So it's a valuable experience. We have here today, and please forgive me if I don't mention our external guests, because I wouldn't know what or who you represent. But I can speak for the students. We have here students from Mauritius, again from Mauritius / Sweden, China, Malaysia, South Korea, Yemen, UK, Russia, that is if not to consider me, Zimbabwe, again Malaysia, and yeah, I think that will be it. Yeah, so Now I will introduce the second speaker, and after this we can deal with Q&A. So I would like to urge the students especially of our class of contemporary security challenges to be prepared with your questions, and indeed they were furnished with some reading before our today's meeting. And I would like to introduce to you Mr. Nasser Memon, who is a development professional. He has worked at senior positions and leading organizations in development, humanitarian and private sectors and academia for over 20 years. He has worked in senior role with a number of reputable organizations such as World Bank, Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, Anglo Corporation, Strengthening Participatory Organization, Leadership for Environment and Development, or LEAD, Pakistan, and WWF in Pakistan. Mr. Memon has a background in climate change, natural disasters, humanitarian aid, advocacy, and human rights. He's currently a member of the Prime Minister's Green Climate Fund and also a member of the Leadership Council of Sustainable Development Solutions Network, Pakistan. Mr. Memon is also a chairperson of National Humanitarian Network in Pakistan. He served on the International Technical Group for the Development of Core Humanitarian Standards and Coherent Standards Architecture. After the floods of 2010 and 2022, he wrote a series of articles in leading newspapers discussing climate vulnerability, resilience of communities, quality of response, and other related topics. He's also authored research books on natural disasters and climate change in the region and in Pakistan itself. Mr. Nasir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julia, and everybody for having me on this forum. Am I audible? Please just let me know. Can you hear me? All right. Okay. Thank you. And good afternoon from Islamabad, where I am at the moment. Originally, I belong to the province of Sindh in Pakistan, which was the worst flooded area. And I was just listening to a very comprehensive presentation by Mr. Mustafa. I was just referring one credit to the healthcare providers in Pakistan that they averted potentially a huge health disaster that everybody was apprehensive of. So that was a great achievement. In my presentation, I will give you a perspective, the kind of the vulnerabilities Pakistan is facing, the triggers of the last year's flood, actually not just flood, but what actually met is so aggravating that just an excessive rainfall, if I may say, it was not a riverine flood, it was actually an excessive rainfall, how it was converted into disaster. What was the gaps in the preparedness and the overall governance structure, the infrastructure, and all these dimensions that ultimately caused that havoc. Mr. Julia, may I request you, could you please upload my presentation? Do you have that?
Yeah, but
let me try.
Is it okay if I share my screen and I just click for you going across the presentation?
Okay.
If that's okay, just give me one moment.
Yeah. So let me try if I can do it from here.
Because I'm a bit of an amateur. I'm not sure how to share it, so you could
let me try.
Manage it from your side.
It's open on my screen, but somehow
there is an icon in the right corner, right top corner, share. So you can share your screen and just go through it. So let's see. Share desktop.
Yeah, but it's not active button. I'm trying.
Otherwise, I'll just open on mine and we'll go. But it take a little bit of time.
I think I'll need your help. I tried, but it couldn't work from here.
Okay, then just give me 1 second and I'll share the screen.
Sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. Sorry, it's from my end. Technical things. We actually got back to fully offline this semester, and I think I'm also losing the grip on the technical technical things.
So it's normally very straight. As I open it, shows all the options from the desktop, but straightly it's not showing it. It's on my desktop and open at the moment.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll be sharing my screen and just tell me next when to click.
All right, I'll try to make it a full screen. Anyways, I can read it from here. Kindly go to the next slide, please. Yeah, this is just for our foreign students who may wish to know about the basics about the Pakistan. I think we can easily go through it quickly. Just I will be focusing on the fourth point where it's the GDP per capita. That indicates the level of vulnerability in some other inferences. Sorry, some other thing came up. Yeah. So Pakistan is 160 first, I mean 161 number in the world so far the GDP per capita is concerned. And similarly on HDI, which is a very critical index, Pakistan is on the number of 161 out of 192. So it's among the low developing countries. Some other indicators can give you similar more understanding. The life expectancy is 67 years, which is 44th in number, globally speaking. And regarding education, the 57%, which is among the lowest literacy countries. So all these show actually the social and economic vulnerabilities of the country where this disaster has been striking so frequently. Next slide, please. This is the flood map of Pakistan. This gives you an idea. The blue shaded one shows the flood path. It originates from the glaciers at Gilgit-Baltistan on the top, you can see, and then comes down up to the Arabian Sea in the bottom. The lowest part you can see the province of Sindh, which is actually in the bottom of the whole riverine system, and the contours of Pakistan make the flow from top to the bottom towards Sindh. So ultimately, the all flood waters from top or even from left side, you can see Balochistan province. This year that caused the massive flood. This all water enters ultimately to the Sindh province. So it makes it more vulnerable while we talk about Pakistan. And the 2022 flood, when we speak about that flood, actually, much of it actually has devastated Sindh province. In a way, about 80% of impact was on this province. So in the coming slides, I'll be now focusing and zooming in more on the Sindh province, please. Next, please. This is the vulnerability already Mustafa has mentioned. You can see the ranking of Pakistan on the top 10 and preparedness level. We are already low on that preparedness level. So overall, the risk level appears on the second last column, which is 6.2. In terms of ranking, you can see among the highest vulnerable ranked countries in the world. So that indicates that where Pakistan stands. Next slide, please. This is the prognosis for 2050 about the precipitation and the temperatures, and you can see if you look at the bottom of Sindh province, which I was mentioning was the worst hit, the temperature is expected to rise to 2.1 degrees, which is quite huge, and the precipitation is expected to increase by 4% over the period. This is I'm quoting from a World Bank report. So by 2050, it shows that how gradually our vulnerability has to increase in the coming years. And in all parts of Pakistan, except for the left-hand side in precipitation in Balochistan, you can see it's going down, hopefully. But this is not a good sign because that whole region is arid. So that's, again, while it shows negative, but actually in terms of vulnerability, it is positive. It increases. Thank you. Next slide, please. Currently, the average impact of the disaster is that flooding in Pakistan is annually affecting more than 700,000 people. This is on average. And its impact on GDP is $1.7 billion. If we factor in the climate change, and there are certain projections, one of the studies show that the population affected may go up to 1.5 million. That is the twice what is the average currently. So it can double the impact on population. And the impact of GDP could go up to $5.8 billion by 2030. So these are very disturbing prognosis, but that's where we stand today. Next, please. Kindly skip this one. This is the vulnerability hazard map of Sindh province, what we are talking about, where last year we witnessed a huge disaster. You can see from all directions, you can notice that one or other way there is some vulnerability associated with Sindh province. Whole Sindh is actually, the flood region runs through the center of Sindh from top to bottom. And on the left hand side, if you can see, I have marked hill torrents. These are all hilly parts, and massive torrential flows are generated during the rainfalls. And last year, actually, these hill torrents caused the major floods in Sindh. In addition to the unabated continuous rainfall for 3 days, the hill torrents from Balochistan, that's the other province on the left side, which is Balochistan, that brings hill torrents towards Sindh province. Then if you go to the bottom, you can see the heat waves, particularly in Karachi and other parts as well. At times, temperature in the northern part of Sindh goes up to 51 degrees Celsius. You can imagine how terrible it could be. Then vulnerability of Sindh in the bottom area, you can see there's Arabian Sea, there are coastal areas, vulnerable to cyclones. On the left-hand side, right-hand side bordering with India, that has fault zone. So the earthquake is one of the vulnerabilities. And on the right and left side, we see the light blue shade. These areas are vulnerable to droughts. So this is our vulnerability situation of Sindh. Next, please. Now I'll be going to what went wrong last year. What was not done so well? What should be the learnings? I just highlighted, it wasn't that we were caught unguarded. It wasn't that we never knew that something's going to happen that much of scary scales. There was an early warning. And I have quoted, just put an image from an advisory of our meteorological department, which clearly says that if you read the top line, it says there is also some projection. This was perhaps June when this advisory came. I don't remember the exact date, but it was in June. It says there's also some prediction that Pakistan could even experience a similar scale of floods that occurred in 2010. So this was warned 3 months back as a weather outlook of the regional level. And on the right side, the other image, you can see our Minister for Climate Change did a press conference. It was in June again. It said the Pakistan need to brace for a heavy monsoon. This was the call by the Minister of Climate Change. So there were every reason Pakistan had in some early warning, some ominous warnings were coming up. But unfortunately, preparedness did not match the level of warning that were issued in advance. Next, please. In July, now I'm telling you the story of the flood. In July, it started happening in Balochistan province. On the top side, right image, you can see I have just carved out the province of Balochistan and Sindh. On the left side, it is Balochistan, from where the torrential flows entered into the right side area of Sindh province. That area, and everybody in Sindh, definitely in Pakistan, definitely knows when there is huge rainfall in the catchments of Balochistan province, the natural waterways diverted towards Sindh province. So it was for sure that if there are abnormal rains in Balochistan, Sindh will receive floods from Balochistan. If you look at the top left, I have put an image from the leading newspaper of Pakistan, Express Tribune. It says Sindh, Balochistan both received over 500% rainfall, which was for month of July, it broke the record of 30 years. So one can imagine that it was happening in July. The worst flood that arrived in Sindh province that actually caused massive devastation and displacement was after the 15th August. So a month before, there were clear signs that there is abnormal rainfall in Balochistan. So there is likelihood that eventually this water will generate a huge runoff, a flood that will eventually reach to Sindh province. So again, after the early warning, which was more based on certain data analysis and outlook, this was a more firm information that was telling us. But unfortunately, the management, the provincial administration did not take timely measures to get ready for this flood, which was on the way. So thus I'm sharing that it wasn't too sudden. It was happening. Warnings and actual warnings on ground were very obvious and evident. Next, please. Now, once the flood came, what happened? Unfortunately, the rescue and relief was not up to the mark. There were no early warnings for evacuation. There were towns with massive population. Almost 9 to 10 million people were displaced due to floods. And imagine 9 to 10 million is a huge population. So the large towns of population of more than 200,000, 100,000, they had to vacate, and numerous small settlements, they had to vacate their areas. But there were no early warnings, evacuation calls were not given. There were no emergency evacuation support made available. For example, you can see at the picture on the right side, this is one of the thousands of such pictures. You can see the depth of water and how people are shifting their household items. This is just one sign. They were at their own. There was no support available from the government side. Neither there were boats arranged to evacuate people, nor the transport were arranged to shift the people to any safer locations. And women, children, and elderly and disabled, they were the most vulnerable who did not receive any support. Camps were not established, although I was telling you in the last slide that at least a month before there was a clear indication that flood is definitely arriving, but there were no camps, proper camps. I mean, the camps does not mean just hanging a shred of cloth and supporting it with sticks is not the camp. So there were no proper camps, and all of us in the disaster science understand what the proper camps mean. It should have a proper residential area, the wash facilities, the health facilities, the drinking water facilities, everything. That wasn't anything like that. One or two good camps were established, but at a very later stage when people were already displaced and they were suffering. So for several days, millions of people were without food and shelter and the clean water. They were lying on the elevated ground, some embankments, surrounded by water for several days. So this was a very terrible situation. In some of the towns where there was the pumping stations we have a department called Public Health Engineering Department. They have huge pumping stations meant to pump out water and actually to provide drinking water to communities. But those pumping stations, most of the cases were either insufficient or in certain cases they were dysfunctional. Unfortunately, there was a collapse of administration we couldn't see. I'm talking of the rescue and relief state. There were some improved response at a later stage, but at the rescue and relief at the initial phase, there was a kind of a collapse of administration. One bad thing that unfortunately somehow in Pakistan generally and particularly in Sindh, the local governments are practically non-existent, are not properly empowered. The elections were not held that time. The institutions were not ready. So the lowest tier of the government was actually dysfunctional for all practical purposes. And regarding the architecture of humanitarian response, as Mr. Mustafa was telling you about the National Disaster Management Authority, there are provincial disaster management authorities, and the same act says, the Act of the Assembly that created these entities says that there will be the District Disaster Management Authority, the lowest tier. But unfortunately, the district disaster management authorities that should have been playing pivotal role, are actually non-existent in Pakistan. They are, for all practical reasons, they do not exist. So that was the administrative and the governance gap that aggravated the floods. Next slide, please. I won't be going into the detail because I think at least Mustafa and Shaista understand that these two massive, huge drainage projects called left bank outfall drain and right bank outfall drain. These are the drainage projects on the both banks of Indus River. Uh, Although these are not designed as the storm drains, but during the heavy floods, these drains are the only conduit to carry the water safely to Arabian Sea. But sadly, these drains are not being maintained properly. The left bank outfall drain has very limited capacity, much lesser than the rainfall that was received that year. And on the right bank, the whole flood from that entered from Balochistan, the RBOD, the right bank outfall drain, actually couldn't sustain the pressure, and there were close to a dozen of breaches occurred in this drain. And rather than evacuating the water, this drain caused the flooding of different towns on the right bank area of Sindh province. Next, please. Next one. A few suggestions. I'll be going through the problem statements and then suggestions. I think the right bank, you can see again, I have reproduced the same map of Sindh province. The actual devastation this time came from the right bank. And in 2010, again, if you recall, I'm sure Mustafa Saab knows that in 2010, the whole disaster or much of the disaster came from the right bank. So this right bank area of Indus, which has hills, the adjoining Balochistan province, it has its own vulnerabilities. And it definitely needs a proper flood management plan for the right bank. Unfortunately, we do not have a cohesive or integrated flood management plan for the right bank area. This is much more required at the moment. And then there are old natural waterways that existed before our barrage system that started in 1930s during the English era, and the whole network of canals was created, but the natural waterways that were actually obstructed because of those new canal networks, the road networks, the population settlement. So this is a major issue that the natural waterways has been mostly blocked in these areas. So when the floods arrive, the water gets trapped actually, and doesn't get outlets to evacuate to some other areas which are the non-populated. So that's one major problem on both sides, right and left side. So that whole area need to be thoroughly revisited. And then the Balochistan province, again, I have to emphasize on that because the runoff was generated from Balochistan, and uh, unfortunately, the communication or the coordination between the two provinces at the bureaucratic level was also very weak. This I am sharing from very personal sources of information. There was a serious lack of communication between the bureaucracy of two provinces, how to coordinate when floods come. Then there are a lot of towns on the right bank. Some of them were inundated, and there's a need to create flood protection dikes around these large towns. In couple of cases where people living in those towns, they erected these kind of a shabby embankments, dikes themselves, and flood was arriving. But they were not properly constructed on engineering standards. This is the people's response, community response. There is a need based on the experience of 2010 and 2022 that there should be the proper dikes should be constructed around the large settlements on the right side. Next slide, please. Please don't go into the details of the table. I'm just sharing few another dimension, which is of the settlement pattern. You know, this area of the right bank has geographically sprawled and with a very thin population, very sparse population. And the population density is not more than 350 persons per square kilometer. This is the average of Sindh province. If you go in these areas, perhaps this will be even less than that, half of that. So I'm just showing a data that was collected through local NGO. 13 out of the 16 districts that have 65% of settlements have less than 50 houses. Now imagine there are dozens of scattered settlements, very tiny, less than 50 households. What size of it could be? And if the number of such settlements is over 65%, then you can imagine how thinly spread is the population, how vulnerable it becomes to provide them infrastructure, to provide them evacuation facilities, to provide them other safety measures. So this very settlement pattern, this is a different dimension, but has not been studied in detail. That has actually contributed towards massive displacement and the suffering of people. And moreover, the some close to 75% houses of these areas, we locally call them kacha. Kacha means either there are shabby structures of mud bricks with mud plaster, unbacked bricks, or most of the time these are thatched huts and not properly built structures. So much of poverty in these areas. So the kind of infrastructure where people live and the pattern of the settlements, both have actually caused the scale of havoc. This could have been lesser if settlements have been properly developed and the structures could have been of better quality. Now, why it is a separate debate, but this I have indicated how this settlement pattern has contributed to the disaster. Next, please. So the suggestion is that some resilient settlements should be created. This is an opportunity where close to 2 million houses have been partially or fully damaged. So 2 million houses are to be rebuilt over next 2 to 3 years. Some finances have been provided through international lenders, and some have been mobilized by the government itself. So whole new construction is going through. Unfortunately, this is a kind of unplanned response that I am personally witnessing on ground. The same kind of infrastructure, a little better in terms of now that the proper built structure will be there, but the settlement pattern is not being addressed again. So possibly one suggestion is that there could be the larger settlements, there could be the clustering of the settlements. So rather than having small sprawled settlements of 10, 20, and 50 houses, there could be the bigger settlements of maybe 200 and 300 townships. So that could be better protected and provided better infrastructure in case of emergencies. Next, please. Another suggestion about these structures, you can see on the left side, I've just shown from different areas, not from Pakistan, but just to propose, you can see the roads having proper culverts. Now, unfortunately, the roads that have been constructed in the floodplains of Sindh province and also the Punjab province, which is in the north of Sindh, I have personally observed, my background is in the civil engineering, and I have seen there are lack of adequate cross drainage structures. In the long reaches of several kilometers of roads, there are no cross drainage structures provided. Strangely, this is purely engineering failure, the design failure. So water gets trapped along the roadside. So there is a need of retrofitting of these roads and a proper designing of the future roads, that it should have more frequent and adequate drainage flow paths in the shape of culverts that you can see on the left side of the slide. And then in the floodplain, the housing pattern should also be changed. It should be on the raised platforms or raised columns. There are now flood resilient housing structures are frequently available, have been tried in different areas. Luckily, this time when the 2 million houses are being reconstructed, some local universities have been involved by the government to design them as climate proof or the climate resilient structures. So that need to be made kind of a norm, a standard, that no house or no structure should be constructed without catering it to the flood protection provisions. And there are different ways in different areas. So these are some of the suggestions how the structures could be improved. Next, please. The agriculture is the mainstay of Pakistan's economy, and more importantly for Sindh and Punjab provinces, they are the bread baskets of Pakistan. Unfortunately, this year we had a major hit in our crops and crop production. Some 3.7 million acres of crops were devastated in Sindh. It's an enormous loss. The standing crops of cotton and rice and sugarcane were actually washed out in all this area. So the small growers and farmers have particularly lost their livelihood. And the concept of climate smart agriculture is now sufficiently evolved that makes provision for proper agriculture systems, choice of agriculture commodities, the crops choice, the infrastructure required for the agriculture system, that everything is being now revisited, and it's called climate smart agriculture. It's a whole new paradigm and concept. There's an urgent need to adopt it and shift from this conventional pattern of agriculture that is being practiced in Pakistan in general and in Sindh in particular. Next, please. One important dimension which has not been discussed widely, that is the schools in Sindh. Again, in the Sindh province, one of the lowest literacy levels, some 45% of school buildings are actually damaged, or either partially or fully. And that rendered more than 2 million children out of school for several months. In fact, there are areas after 6-7 months, still those areas are underwater. Imagine, because of the flat topography of Sindh province. So, in brief, the school infrastructure that was created by Sindh province during last 75 years, half of it is actually gone. So this is the social side. 35% of girls' schools have been damaged. Girls' literacy is already very low, particularly in rural areas. And when half of that structure is gone, this is a huge social setback when we further lose the opportunity to send our kids to schools. And this has unfortunately not been debated much. It's a missing link. So that's why I wanted to highlight it. Next, please. Just propose different infrastructure of the schools. These models are now very common in different countries, including in Southern Asian countries. There are elevated grounds, there are elevated foundation, there are buildings erected on the elevated columns, like the houses I showed in the previous slide. So there's a need that any fresh construction of the school. Last month, I was speaking at a conference organized by JICA with the education department, and I made the presentation on this, that if the several thousand schools are to be reconstructed, please construct them as flood-proof schools to save them from future disasters. Next, please. These are the waterways. I already mentioned the natural waterways that was created by flowing water over the millennia has been actually during last 50 years. There have been a huge population growth. There as croplands have increased, infrastructure has been built, houses have been constructed, villages constructed, new roads have been constructed, and all these structures did not consider that most of them are actually blocking the natural flow path of water. When the rain occurs, when the floods occur, the runoff is generated, these flow paths would traditionally take water to the desert areas. That was the history. And now when all these water has been, now the areas have been choked, so what happens? Water gets trapped when there's a huge rainfall. On the left side, you can see a pocket of natural flow path. It is a depression. Water would tend to flow southward, shown through the arrows. In the middle, you can see a line going through. This is the left bank outfall drain. It's a huge structure which is elevated. So you can see this is one example that how natural flow path has been blocked. And in 22, this whole area remained inundated for more than 2 weeks. Several villages were destroyed. Thousands of people were homeless, mainly because when this drain was constructed, it wasn't provided with cross drainage infrastructure so that it could drain the water below this drain structure. So this is one example how blocking the natural waterways multiplied the effect of this havoc. Next, please. Go ahead, please. I'm just passing through this repetition. Now, perhaps this is one of the last few slides. What is the option for Pakistan? What should we do? We need to create resilience. There is no other option, and that is the climate adaptation. We do not have capacity to mitigate. In fact, even developed countries do not have the capacity to mitigate the whole impact. It will, I don't know how many decades will be required, but we have to adjust. That is called the adaptation. Our infrastructure need to be adapted. Our agriculture need to be adapted, and the living pattern and everything has to be adjusted. So that is the future for us. So all the academicians, engineers, agriculturists, social scientists, development learners, they have to adopt this new approach and the new pathways. We have to live with this situation, so we have to harmonize our development with climatic realities. Development can't be stopped. but it should not be done in a way that every year it brings more disaster to us. So it has to be harmonized with the climate realities. That is the adaptation. And that needs a whole shift of the vision and thinking of the development. That needs a leadership with the new vision. That is the fundamental challenge for Pakistan today, how we can adapt this shift. Next, please. I hope this is the end of the slide. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for listening to my presentation. And now I am available for any further discussion. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nasir. Sorry again for the mishap with the presentation, but I hope you feel after this we made a good team with me clicking and you presenting. That was also comprehensive and what I'm thankful in particular to you is for the data. You presented quite a lot of data, which tells us in more detail about what happened and what were lapses in policies deployed after the floods erupted. And also it was quite illustrative, although we were following it closely, but it's not always that we exactly look at the footage or the photos. So it was very illustrative to what you were talking about, like, for example, schools or particular house structures. I have a number of questions, but I think I'll hold on to it and first open the floor to the present students and our guests. Maybe you could raise your hand so I could try figure out what's the sequence and where we should go. Students? Mohammed. Okay, so Mohammed, you will go first. I will encourage others to think of what they got to ask. If no one resurfaces until we're done answering, then I think I will ask mine. You can direct the question to any particular speaker or just to both. That's up to you. Mohammed, go ahead.
Hello, it's a question for both speakers. How is the response? Has it improved since the floods in 2010, or is it similar issues? Has there been substantial improvement?
I think any of the speakers can take this up, Mr. Nasir or Mr. Mustafa. That's up to you if you both would like to say something.
It's hard to do. I think it'll be interesting to do a point-by-point comparison, but my general sense is that things have improved considerably from an overall response perspective as far as the interagency workings are concerned. I do think that there are complications on the population level that have exacerbated things over the last 12 or 13 years. That may create additional complexities that have to be dealt with. So in general, I think there is a path towards being more organized and more resilient and more robust.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Asap. My take is slightly different. I think when we faced the earthquake of 2005, there was a massive earthquake in 2005. Close to 75,000 people died in Pakistan. At that time, the architecture of disaster response was created. National Disaster Management Authority, Earthquake Reconstruction and Rehabilitation Authority was created. Provincial authorities were created. I recall that time I was working in different areas with the response team. I could see government was better organized and agile at that time. Response was very quick, but one major factor, that was the international community's response. That time in 2005 and in 2010, there was a very generous response from international community. United Nations offices, UN OCHA was very active in Pakistan. I used to sit in different meetings and remember every day there would have been meetings and discussions and follow-up was going on. This time, unfortunately, I couldn't see the matching response from even UN office. I have been asking them that what happened this time. UN OCHA did not roll out their clusters. The international aid agencies, because of some kind of an unfavorable political ambience over last 5-7 years, most of them have actually left Pakistan because of several restrictions. And I don't want to go into that debate, but this was not a good decision. The way those organizations, they would be normally among the first to come and respond at the time of this such crisis. But this time we have very few of them on ground. Government itself, to be fair, the kind of economic constraints that Pakistan is going through, there's very limited financial resources available at the hand of government. The last thing I would tell you that the Geneva conference, donor conference, where close to $10 billion were pledged. And there was an estimate that by June this year, Pakistan was supposed to receive $1.5 billion. Out of that $1.5 billion, only $300 million have been received. That is only 20%. So the whole response, and because of this different crisis going on in different parts, particularly the Russian side, and then the Syria and other parts, the Yemen and Sudan. So perhaps there's a donor fatigue as well, and priorities have shifted from humanitarian response to the conflict response. And these are political realities as well. So that has actually deprived Pakistan from the matching response as we received in 2010 and 2005. That's why we see the response a bit sluggish this time.
Thank you to both speakers for replying to this. Mr. Nasir, can I just clarify? So there is mostly no one on the ground amongst the international agencies which were available at the time of the floods of 2022. Most of them, you say, closed down. Because we know we had this, as I mentioned, the IFRC director on Asia Pacific. And as far as we know, he had to travel there with a team, and he also complained about the very limited resources available to deal with it, and also the time constraint. Like, for example, if you need to order thousands of blankets and they are not available, you can't just pay for them and they emerge from nowhere. That's just one example. So there is, amongst the international humanitarian aid agencies, that there was pretty much no one on the ground.
Very few of them. In 2010 flood, the international aid came close to $3 billion. And this time, not even $1 billion. There was shortage of tents, huge shortage of tents. When Mustafa would recall that at the first stage, there was a huge demand of shelter, tents. And there were no tents. People were lying under open sky, imagine. And only, I think, hardly a dozen of international aid agencies I can see working on the ground with a very small resources at their disposal. And another challenge, when international aid organizations operate directly, a good part of their funding goes to the overheads because the overheads are too high. I think not less than 40% goes to their administrative costs, salaries and vehicles and offices and everything. So this time I see that they don't help the local NGOs, local humanitarian groups to respond. Most of the international agencies, they are already a handful of them, and they tend to operate directly. And when they operate directly, 40 to 50% amount is actually gone on the administration costs. So that's why there's not, I would say, inadequate response at the best I can say.
Thank you. Mohammed, was your question answered? I can still see your hand raised, or is just remaining from Mohammed? Okay, Jisoo?
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. First of all, thank you, Mr. Mustafa, and thank you, Mr. Nazil, for your speech. So I have a question about the dam construction. So since 2010 flooding, I'm aware there has been some discussion for building more dams, and now there is a mega dam project going on in Pakistan. So I'm aware there's some debate about whether the dam on the Indus River can prevent future flooding and water shortage and drought, or whether this dam can actually exacerbate like ecosystem and not really doing the role of flooding prevention. So I do have question to Mr. Nazir. Do you think that building dam can be a climate resolution?
Thank you. This is a very important debate that keeps going on in Pakistan. Dams have been surrounded by various controversies as well. Talking particularly about this 2022 flood first, no dam on Indus would have prevented this flood because the flood did not come from river this time. Riverine flood was hardly 600,000 cusics this year, maximum up to 700,000 cusics. And our barrage system was pretty much capable to drain it safely. So there was no riverine flood. The small dams that were constructed in Balochistan for kind of local needs to drinking water, raising the groundwater, most of them were actually washed away because of the flash floods. They were torrential floods. So rather those dams caused localized damages in those areas. Now coming to even 2010 floods, the scale of the 2010 flood was so enormous that perhaps the largest dam that we have today, 5 dams of that size could not have absorbed that flood. So the dams which are generally perceived as to be a possible engineering solution to huge floods in the context of Pakistan, I rather see a greater risk with these dam structures. They become exposed when such massive floods come. They become exposed to the vulnerability. What if such a big dam, God forbid, bursts? You cannot imagine the scale of devastation that it could impact. Now, ecological debate is another issue. So many, we have 2 big dams and about a dozen barrages, and the whole delta region where Mustafa Saab is living in Karachi and the whole coastal region, there is a huge ecological devastation in Indus Delta. Our mangroves forests have been actually diminished to 20-30% hardly compared to 40-50 years back because the delta is not receiving water. The water distribution politics is another challenge for Pakistan, where upstream and downstream provinces keep fighting on their water share. And there are several dimensions of that. But in a nutshell, I'd say that the large dams, now we are already constructing a large dam which is called Basha Dam up north from where our Indus River actually originates. It will have a capacity of close to 6 million acre cubic feet, which is equivalent of our presently the largest dam, Tarbela, that we have. It is close to the same size. So that dam has taken more than 20 years when it was inaugurated, and still it is not completed. Only yes, today our leading newspaper Dawn has commented that because of currency devaluation, only the electricity generation component of that dam, its price has gone up by 55 billion rupees in 6 months. So imagine we are struggling for every single dollar and rupee these days. So when we talk of these massive structures, this needs huge tons of money. I would rather advocate Pakistan needs what? Better water conservation mechanisms, better flood mitigation solutions, more towards nature-based solutions. There are nature-based solutions, much better and effective than engineering solutions. I'm an engineer, but I always talk of the nature-based solutions. Out of my own experience, I see that offers better solutions to Pakistan. But that's my perspective on that.
Thank you very, very much for answering. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jack?
Hi, thanks, Dr. Julia. Hi, thanks, Mr. Nasir and Mr. Mustafa for the presentation. I just have 2 questions relating to data. So my first question is, how challenging was collecting the data, right? And what were some of the challenges you faced? Second would be, does this data have any value for comparative purposes? especially in regards to how the flood has affected each district differently, the performance of aid efforts in each district, etc., and whether any insights can be drawn from this. Thank you.
Mustafa, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, sure. You know, the collection and the scrubbing and the reporting of data is always challenging. It's especially when you have to mobilize in such rapid fashion. But we were pretty diligent in applying the same methods that we do when we run research projects. One of the things that I think we had a relative advantage on is that we gather a ton of data up and down Pakistan quite a bit, so we were able to sort of apply the same rigor and the process and the methodology, but it still requires quite a bit of scrubbing and organizing and cleaning, especially when you're setting up these de novo camps in places that you don't really operate in, and also requires quite a bit of training of the staff to make sure that they're collecting it properly, that they're inputting it properly. So it's not straightforward, but if you prioritize it enough, it tends to pay a lot of dividends.
Mr. Nasir, would you like to add something?
I agree with that. The data and the reliability of data is generally a big challenge. Though the Provincial Disaster Management Authority and National Disaster Management Authorities were very quick this time to update their data on the websites. If you click on the NDMA website or PDMA, Provincial Disaster Management Authority site, you will find very comprehensive data of losses, the response. It's a good situation reports. There were the situation reports being produced on a daily basis. But the challenge is, does that data helps the response work, or it is only good for some research work? Now, ideally, when that flood is going on, or even after the floods, the data should help the planners to establish some response mechanisms. Now, unfortunately, we've seen this data is being used more to create empathy at the international forums to beseech for more funds. But I haven't yet to see that how this data is being translated into some climate proofing, some readiness for the next flood. That part is missing. So data is an input. In itself, data is not the result. It helps to take you towards some result. For example, one health-related thing where Mustafa can guide us better, there were 650,000 pregnant women when floods struck. Now, I, as a citizen of Pakistan, as of today, I don't know what happened to those 650,000 pregnant women in Sindh. How many of them survived? How many of them could not? What happened to their children? Where they delivered their babies? What are the impacts on their children and the women after that, the trauma they had been through? Now, all these are the things. Now, the 650,000 is a number. It's a data. It tells me something. But how it translates into action, that is the story where I feel the link is missing.
Thank you. I actually had a question regarding those pregnant women as well. Like, is there any follow-up, and overall, how many children survived? I mean, how many of those women and their children survived, of those who were caught up directly in that? Because I think Mr. Mustafa brought up some numbers on that. Jack, you okay? Were your questions answered?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Parthiban?
Hi, Doctor. Thank you very much. Good evening again to the panelists. Thank you so much for your insightful information regarding about the previous Pakistan's flood. I've also read a bit about what happened. Also made some. Also did a short research under Dr. Julia's assignment. However, my question is pretty straightforward. Despite we all know that climate change and natural disasters are going to be something frequent in the coming many more years to come, and also Pakistan having faced this sort of disasters before 2010, 2005, and so on. I wish to comment that or even highlight why does the Pakistani government doesn't place its importance on these elements, medical, rehabilitation, humanitarian aspect. If you were to compare the budget, the yearly budget, where you see the defense budget has been always increasing, and I wish to get your insight. Why doesn't the Pakistani government change its approach rather than putting more emphasis on defense budgeting and rather putting it for human security? Because traditional security, perhaps at this point of time, will not matter too much, but human security, people's life will be something very, very important and crucial. So your take on this to the panelists. Thank you.
I mean, I agree with you. And, it's unfortunate that, we have political agendas that drive, expenditure. And I wish that wasn't the case. I wish, um, many countries in the developing world would spend less on buying bombs and more on buying, milk and sugar and, wheat for people. So it's a loaded question. I don't know if I'm the right person to answer for, the government's fiscal policies, but I do know that fiscal space in Pakistan is very, very tight, especially right now. So hence the reliance on international aid.
I actually endorse what Mustafa had said. These are the wrong priorities on part of our ruling elites. We want more bombs than bread, and we don't have enough schools and hospitals, but we have more arsenal with us. This is a very unfortunate reality that people of Pakistan suffer only because the regional conflicts create more space and justification for having more bigger arsenal and weapons, which ultimately, to me, actually reduces the security, because when people start dying of hunger and drought and disasters, so what is the security? Security are the lives of people. So if the people's lives are not secure, to me, this securing anything else has perhaps of little value. So this is unfortunately a classic case study where these states, I'm generally saying because there are other countries also doing similar things with their own people. This is sheer injustice with masses, that the priority is not the human, the citizens, and priorities are more placed on either developing massive infrastructures, more the piles of weapons, which is actually only meant to kill. We need to invest more on the means of lives rather than investing more on the means to kill lives.
Thank you. More spent on guns than butter.
Yep.
That's a classic dilemma.
I
Doctor,
wanted, sorry,
yeah,
if I can just add.
yeah, sure. Go ahead.
How do the panelists see this? Will we see a reduction in defense spending over the next few years as Pakistan needs to address these humanitarian issues? Your take, please. Thank you.
I'm focused on healthcare, so I wish I could comment. If you ask my personal opinion, yeah, I think it's kind of silly, right? And looking at where we are today and where the world is going to be 10, 15, 20, 50 years from now, to continue spending, using methods that are frankly pretty outdated. So personally, yes, I'd like to see that happen, but I'm not sure how that actually translates into government policy. If you make me, prime minister or president, or make me the general of the Pakistan army, I'd probably disband most of the stuff. But I don't know.
My immediate recommendation that Mustafa should be made president next day, so at least he can destroy all those files. I really don't see any such hope. What you are mentioning, that will government of Pakistan at coming years would shift its priorities from the so-called defense to the development of people, human development. Uh, I don't see any possibility in the near future. We can always wish that there are voices in Pakistan. It's not that people don't speak. People do speak. People do demand it. People talk about that. But unfortunately, this doesn't seem happening in the near future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Maybe if I could, since we're having a break in the raised hands, I could ask the question to recap on this discrepancy between, and I think it relates to what Mr. Nasir was talking about, the discrepancy between a proper early warning and alarm system in place, especially being built on the basis of the previous natural disasters and the earthquake and the 2010 floods, and those multiple lapses that you talked about. Can we, during the rescue, during the rescue and relief, can we then attribute it, and should we then be attributing it to the political situation and political priorities, or misprioritization of different things, or there is something else? Why there was such a discrepancy between the early alarm system? So the government should have been aware, and then the lapses in response.
Personally, I think that government was pretty, perhaps they were much contented. They thought that, when the situation arises, we'll see. This is the normal tendency with us. That is, okay, let it happen, we'll see what it happens. You tell them that army is on your doorstep, okay, let them enter, we'll see how to deal with them. So this is the general, the approach towards preparedness. Now, when we say preparedness, obviously it needs resources. And what resources you need? Hardly a fraction of the resources that you then need after the disaster. Hardly a fraction of that. Preparedness doesn't need tons of money. It's only the mindset and approach and the vision of leadership. Every year, we get the monsoon contingency plan. This is developed by our disaster management authorities. You can refer it on their website. A nicely built book by the consultants. Hardly anyone reads it. And whatever, for example, in the Sindh contingency plan, the level of possible displacement was mentioned only 65,000 people, whereas 9 million people got displaced. And the preparedness was not even enough to cater to 65,000 people, let alone 9 million. So these exercises become more ceremonial, just to put it on the website. Second, I think the local governments not having effective local government system actually multiplies the vulnerability. If there had been very strong and well-resourced local government systems on ground, perhaps the response could have been much better. When these disasters spread on such a vast area, it's not easy for the government sitting in the headquarters to respond everywhere. It's only possible when there are local response capacities. So this debate has now gained some attention, at least this year. And from even now, 3 months later, we expect a monsoon. And I personally know that some preparedness has been started this year. Learning from the past disaster, it is a good thing that there is some learning, and some preparations have been started, some resources have been allocated, though there are the tight belt situation these days. But this should be the norm. Every year, you should expect any flood, any disaster, any moment. The kind of world where we live, not just Pakistan, look at any country, we are all exposed to such disasters now. So this is the matter of priority. This is the matter of being agile. This is the matter of having a good understanding of how to respond to disaster. These are the missing links. These are the weak areas.
Thank you. If I may also ask about the schooling, where is it at now? Has it been restored to some more or less normal level, or it's a far cry from there, schooling for children?
Schooling has not been restored fully. There were some temporary learning centers established by UNICEF and other aid agencies that provided some relief initially, but in some areas they are still going on. In some areas, because of lack of funding, they have been discontinued. Even the government does not have enough money to rebuild the structures. Some 5,000 schools out of 20,000 so far have got some committed resources or pledged resources that over 1 year, the Department of Education in Sindh province says they will be able to perhaps restore about 5,000 schools out of 20,000 damaged. Meanwhile, in certain areas, temporary learning centers have been established, or some temporary schooling have been started at some homes, contributed by community in some other offices. But if I may say that hardly 50% of them has been restored, 50% must be still the students are still out of schools.
I had a question to Mr. Mustafa as well. Apart from the research that you've done and some practical implementation and data collection that you've done on the basis of Aga Khan University, were you involved in collaboration with other organizations which had a big contribution into this? If you may tell us more about this, which other organizations were engaged into this research, and in the process of it, did you feel like whatever you propose has chances to be implemented by the government? I know it hasn't been exactly stable politically. Again, we just talked about this, but do you feel it gets through to the implementation stage?
So I just want to make sure I understand the question. So I joined AKU last year after moving back to Pakistan from the US after 17 years. And a lot of my focus has been on building programs to support, population health initiatives. AKU does research across a host of domains, child and maternal health and infectious diseases, etc. And this research is, categorized, into either, understanding some novel idea, or we do a lot of translational research as well, through some of our larger scale studies. Institutionally, we partner with organizations all over Pakistan and all over the world. I think our global partnerships, in fact, our university librarian was just walking me through the entire sort of database. Like, you name a place in the world and we have a university that we're partnering with. So I'm not sure if the question is specific to the floods. Our flood response was less of a research thing and more of leveraging the research infrastructure that we already have to run medical camps through the hospitals and clinics that we already operate in Karachi itself.
So you've seen it being deployed?
Correct.
Like real time?
Yes.
Okay, I guess my question was around that. Indeed, yeah. If you just provided recommendations, and how much they were taken into consideration by the government.
Yeah. So
because
these
it's not
medical
always
camps, right? We were staffing and running them through our own staff. When we set these up. In the post flood work that we're doing, right, the waters have receded, but the damage is there. Now we're starting to work with the government hospitals. In Sindh, we have this thing called the PPHI. They run some hospitals. The government, owns and runs a number of hospitals at the district level. And there are some private institutions as well. So we're working with them to really give them sort of a similar, training that we have for our own staff, in the hopes that they can sort of better respond to these crises in the future.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor, comrades? Okay, I'll ask one more, and we will wrap it up. I think it's just about the Maghrib prayer time over here, so I can see a reluctance to raise anything else. I was interested in also Mr. Mustafa, to your presentation. You were talking about some programs for mental health support and obviously targeting malnutrition. How do you assess success on that front? Recently, we've seen, I think it made it to the news, an episode where some people died in stampede when trying to receive meals. So I guess in terms of addressing malnutrition, maybe there were also some lapses. And also, I'm very much interested, how do you aid the mental health post?
Yeah. I mean, how do you even begin, right? It is in a country with a population this large and the trauma that runs so deep over 70 years and gets exacerbated with every new event every few years, you know, we're actually coming at it first a little bit from an academic perspective. We've recently started mobilizing, our community of faculty and researchers to start doing a lot more baseline studies to understand the burden of mental health disease and mental health illnesses. I think this separately, we have some interventions that we're looking to test on a small scale as well. We're also experimenting with the delivery methods because, there's a stigma around mental health. It actually impacts women and, more in our society. It also impacts, the underserved disproportionately. So we're still very early stage right now. And getting our arms wrapped around, okay, what is the burden of the disease and how does it manifest itself across various strata of society? Second is, what are the interventions that we deploy and how do we test and measure the efficacy over what period of time? And third is, what are the right channels of effective delivery? Because, some people are more comfortable in person. Some people would want a degree of anonymity. Some people would want to do it telephonically, etc. And I think we're exploring this omni-channel type of an approach. So I think we're still early on, but it is an area that, in fact, the health minister for Sindh, she closely works with AKU on a number of public health initiatives. This is one of the things that she surfaced in the early days of the floods, and that really, I think, kicked up the urgency around this on our end. So I think we're still early on, but I'm hoping to see some good data around it and some good impact around it in the months ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Nasir, would you like to add anything?
Oh, I think that nutrition is already a huge challenge in Sindh. I guess close to 50% children are victim of wasting and stunting. And this kind of situation where millions have remained displaced and without house and food, this number must have gone up. And we are lagging far behind on SDGs as well. And we are set to lose the SDG targets. Minimal gains that we had over last years, we are about to lose that too. Recently, the World Bank has supported government of Sindh to start a nutrition program in several districts of Sindh. This has been one of the focus on the World Bank. In fact, so far, the little bit contribution that has come to Pakistan, especially Sindh, has come from the World Bank somehow. The funded, the donors, the grant money has coming very less. So this area is neglected. And so is the mental health. You refer to that. Mental health is a subject that need to be discussed a lot because the people have gone through an unprecedented trauma. And I accept one organization, International Medical Corps. I know that they have working with some communities on mental health. Perhaps AKU might have done some, UNICEF something, but very little attention has been paid to the mental health of the flood victims.
Thank you so much for that comment. I think I will try to adjourn here to let everyone go. People here for breaking fast and to go about their own things, dinner, if it's not iftar. And I would like to thank our guests. I don't know how to completely express my gratitude for you being with us today. I think it's going to be a highlight of our semester because indeed, as I said, Pakistan floods of 2022, they drew a lot of attention. And I think there is indeed still some activity going on here in Malaysia trying to collect humanitarian aid, though probably also much less after the earthquakes in Turkey, that hit Turkey and Syria. I think it was more or less redirected there at the moment. So I think you brought to the table a lot of valuable insights, and they were backed up by data, which we appreciate very much. And of course, for you allocating your valuable time to speak with us today, because you have a hands-on approach. You are, both of you, you are practitioners, not just academics, and that's the most valuable for us to also understand what's going on. And I think for some of us in the audience here who also work for governmental institutions in their respective countries, and in Malaysia, it's also quite an acquisition in terms of knowledge for today. Thank you so much, and we hope it's not going to be the last time that we speak with you. So we will try to stay in touch, if you don't mind. Thank you, Mr. Mustafa Hassan and Nasir Mamun. Thank you so much, and to Shaista for organizing today's meeting.
It was a
Thank you,
pleasure to
Julia.
be here.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Julia.
Yeah,
And
Thank you
thank you,
very
Shaista, for
much,
making this
and
happen.
you have a good rest of the day.
Same to
Thank
you.
All right.
Thank
take
you.
care,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Hafiz.
Thank you, Dr. Julius. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shaista, and to all the students here. I will stop the recording. Thank you for the guests who joined us today. Hope that you found it useful too. I'm not sure how many are from our university, how many are from the outside. Doesn't matter. Thank you for joining us.